So Kim, if someone had not met your father before, how do you describe the kind of guy your dad was?
Mostly fun-loving, very, very intelligent. Like to, I don't know, he had a really good sense of humor, pretty generous. Liked to be involved in the community, but he's definitely liked to entertain people too.
We take up to when your dad disappeared, and it seemed like he was going through, describe some sort of mental crisis, and I know he kind of disappeared. You guys had contact with him. Take us through that week that just must be a nightmare for you.
Yeah, nightmare that's yesterday sometimes. So the first day, Monday, he just didn't come home from work, which is completely out of character. And my mom called us about 9 and wanted us to go look for him. We assumed he'd been in a car accident or something. And then we ended up finding him about 1 a.m. and it was clear that he was upset about something and not interested in talking. And we had no reason to be concerned at that point, so we just let him go have his time to think or whatever. We didn't know what was going on, so we just kind of let him go. And then the next day, it was my brother that found him Monday night, and then Tuesday, my partner Angie located him again and talked to him, and it was the same thing. Clearly very upset, respectful, distracted, but not interested in chatting it out with anybody, so we let him go again. And then I got in contact with his doctor and kind of told him what was going on and how uncharacteristic, the behavior was for him, because he was super rigid, do the same thing every day my entire life. So for him to do absolutely anything, especially not coming home at night, was just profound. So we knew something was definitely wrong. And he'd recently been diagnosed with CHF and AFib, and so he was kind of going through some emotional struggles with that. And we just kind of thought he was feeling it out, but then we started worrying, maybe he's had a stroke or something else is going on, and he's really confused. So then we went ahead and did the missing report. Ran into him again, and then he was fine again, so we had to cancel it. And then that was kind of it. Last time I saw him, he was same thing, very respectful. I love everybody. I'll be home when I figure it out.
Then you get the word that they have found his body at that Trillium Lake. What went through your head? Take us to that day.
Anger. I got a phone call from the Clackamas County detective while we were actually out driving around, and she asked me to come to my mom's house. And, I've worked in the industry for a long time, so the discreetness that she offered didn't work for me, and I got, a little angry. It was horrific. I knew exactly what was going on, but they couldn't tell me. So unfortunately, we were like an hour away too, so we had to find our way there, knowing without any confirmation basically what happened. So it's kind of stressful. I wanted somebody to get to my mom's house just to be there with her, even though I knew she wasn't alone and we were, a long way off. So it was rough, very rough.
Then you heard the manner in which your dad died. Did you think self-inflicted suicide at the time?
I never thought that until the last time I saw him, which was Tuesday night, and he was so distracted. It was the first time that I had ever considered that was actually going through his head, because it was so out of character for him. So yeah, when we heard, I can't remember if we were notified on Wednesday or Thursday, I guess. That was my very first inclination, was like, oh crap,
Yeah.
But then we found out shortly thereafter that it probably wasn't self-inflicted, and then what, then we're just wondering what the heck happened. I mean, everything else kind of looked like, oh my gosh, he's going through this crisis. He's got some military experience. We were thinking PTSD, with the new health issues and trying to decide whether to retire or not. But, we just didn't have any foundation to do anything. So, yeah, it was just crazy.
Here you are in sort of a limbo along with detectives, where things point to self-inflicted suicide. Evidence points maybe to something else, and yet there's no clear answer. How do you justify that in your mind these days with no conclusion, no answer into the death of your father?
I try not to. is where I'm going right now. I mean, I'm definitely anchored in the hope of, some type of resolution, because it feels like moving on would definitely be a little bit easier with some answers. But yeah, you're just back and forth all the time. Every time you get a little bit of information, it kind of feels like that anchor goes a little bit further, like, oh, I'm not much further from knowing the truth. And then, I don't know. And then the big picture is that it doesn't necessarily change anything. Closure would be nice. We'd definitely be able to move on a little bit better, I think, or easier. But it's not going to change anything.
In your mind, what's your best theory as to what happened to your father?
Oh, man, I don't have one. I've had so many. And right now, I've just resided to, I have no idea. It all looked self-inflicted. I thought about, oh, maybe he's had somebody help him. But then, the truth of it is he could have just been having a bad day, went up there to think it through, because that was a family spot that we were at, and ran into somebody else having a bad day. He certainly wasn't in the mind frame when I saw him. I was the last one to talk to him. He was non-negotiable. So I don't imagine that if he got in a confrontation with a stranger that he would have been any more negotiable with them than he was with me. Certainly not. So
could have been highly irritated or agitated.
Absolutely. And that would be, I'm not a professional, I'm not a psychologist, but I know my dad, and I've been around some stuff over the years, and he was definitely not his normal self. He did not treat me in a way that I've ever seen before. I mean, he was respectful, but it was so distant. I might as well have been the grocery clerk,
And then a little bit about your background. You're no stranger to law enforcement.
No, I just retired from Portland 911. I'm about 19 years there. So
And you've been on the phone with different emergencies and tense situations and things like that, and
definitely
kind of happens to you.
Horrible. It was horrible. I won't lie. It was pretty rough. It's different when it's your family. There's a special little place that you deal with the 911 stuff. You go in there every day, you give it your best effort, you do what you can, but you're not responsible. But then when it kind of crosses over to your family, that level of responsibility changes. You feel like you have a lot more responsibility. You should have done something else, even though all the logic is there. People are going to do what they're going to do. You can't stop them, but at the same time, knowing what was happening and not being able to stop it was pretty terrible.
The part we didn't know that I thought was fascinating is they know exactly when your dad died because of a Fitbit.
Yeah.
Where did he get that from?
My brother and I bought it for him. Well, yeah, after he was diagnosed with the CHF and the AFib, because he was going, trying to pay a little bit more attention to his health and the heart rate and all that stuff. And so when the detectives came out and talked to us, I remembered that he had one. And I had got one so we could do it together. They had the little competitions or whatever, and maybe I was secretly checking up on him. I don't know. But so anyway, he had that, and it turned out to be useful. I happened to have the login information because I got them all set up on it. So
yeah, they said they reached out to you guys for a password, and
yeah,
but that was able to tell kind of his
yeah, I just happened to have the password because I set it up so we could do our thing together. So
now this is going to be kind of sound like a strange question, but if your dad was here in this room right now, what would you tell him?
I love him. I don't know. I forgive him, I guess. But I guess I wouldn't need to if he was here.
I mean, I'm detecting with you there's some anger because this self-inflicted suicide thing is not quite resolved. And
yeah, I mean, I would like to know, did he, was he in a place where he did it to himself, or did he just run across somebody? If for some reason it kind of changes, feels like it changes the way you move on. I mean, it shouldn't really, but it does feel like it would solidify it a little bit. Like, okay, this is what happened. I can accept this and then move on. And right now we're kind of back and forth between, is he responsible? Somebody else responsible? Did it just happen? So it'd be kind of nice to not constantly be toggling back and forth between what did or didn't happen and whether he was in the place to do it himself and we didn't see it, or he just had a bad day.
And yet that evidence haunts you that maybe that's not the way it happened.
Right. Right.
And you strike me as someone who's a pretty logical person.
I try.
And it's like, well, how do you explain the gun found outside the car and blood splatter away from the gun? And there's just so many unknowns here.
Lots of unknowns, and I just keep trying not to explain it. I mean, it seems clear to me that somebody else was involved. Whether it was happenstance and they had some type of argument or whatever, I could see something like that happening, but I also can't imagine my dad not defending himself. They had said from the get-go that there was no signs of struggle, which is not the dad I know. He was fairly highly trained, although he wasn't all super active anymore. I mean, he knew his stuff. He knew how to defend himself. So it just, it doesn't add up. I'd like to know. I don't want to believe that he arranged it himself, but it sure looks like it, but then it could be anything else. Could be anything else.